Hey guys, it's Olka, and today I thought I'd make a video sort of leading on from last one about aiming and how to improve your aim. First thing you want to focus on is finding a good sensitivity, and the way you do that is just do a 180, right? And you want to be able to do it comfortably without using more space than your mouse pad will allow if you have a mouse pad. So a good 180 should be about the width of your mouse pad. You should have to move your hand roughly the width of your mouse pad. But if that's too slow, if you're not comfortable with that, if you find it too slow or too fast, you can definitely turn your sensitivity up or down, so that it is comfortable, but just make sure you're not just able to flick with your wrist, because that's probably too high. And make sure you're not like heaving your entire arm to move, because that's probably too slow. But again, it's down to personal taste, really. You can play with very high sensitivities and you can play with very low sensitivities, but for most people, a sensitivity that lets them comfortably do a 180 without using too much space, but still using enough space, is probably a good foundation to start on. And then from there, you can focus on learning your fundamentals and you'll fine tune your sensitivity over time. The only way you really get to know what your sensitivity is by playing a lot and adjusting it kind of as you play. So, once you get this kind of sensitivity that lets you do 180, you probably don't really want to adjust it by more than like 0.1 in either direction, unless you really need a drastic change. So once you find your like starting sensitivity, this is when you can start working on the rest of the fundamentals. So the first fundamental, and the one that I think is probably the most important, is counter strafing, proper counter strafing. And this kind of, you don't even need to know your sensitivity to be able to counter strafe well. Counter strafing is, in essence, stopping yourself from moving so you don't get that movement error inaccuracy. So when you're moving, you get a movement error. Your shots aren't always on target. You see the way they're going up and down and left and right, despite my crosshair just being at the same level the entire time. So what you want to do with counter strafing is press the opposite movement key to the direction you're moving. So my movement is the standard WASD. So if I'm moving to the right, I'm holding D, right? And then to stop that, I want to press A. So you hold D and then just tap A and hold A and tap D. And what this does is it cancels out the movement. So if I'm moving to the right and I press A, that cancels out my right side movement, which means my shot is accurate. And you can practice slowly at first, just like this. And you see, I'm not even moving my crosshair right now. And I'm just shooting, and you just want to make sure it's accurate, because if you're shooting and then it's slightly off like that, then you need to take it a bit slower and really make sure that you're stopping and then shooting. Because if you're not doing that, you can't accurately or efficiently apply the rest of the fundamentals you're going to learn to aim properly. So counter strafing is definitely the most important part. And from there, you can work on the rest and implement them as you're counter strafing. So the second thing you want to look at after your counter strafing is probably your flicking. This is what I'd consider the second most important thing. Flicking is, kind of self-explanatory. You're flicking from target to target, and you're flicking accurately. And the way you want to do this, the way you want to practice this, is by at first taking it very slow. You don't even have to shoot. You can just go from head to head. And, this doesn't look like flicking, but it builds the foundations for flicking later on. So you just go from head to head. Make sure you're not undershooting like this or even like that. Make sure you're not overshooting, right? So if you're flicking here, you don't want to do that, because that's overshooting for this head. Or if you're aiming for the very right guy, that's under flicking. You want to be right on the head like that. So what you do is you start slow. You go boom, boom, boom. See, even there, that's slightly under flicking. Boom, 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 boom. And you just want to do that to build the fundamentals. You really want to get this down, because if you have good muscle memory, this is all building your muscle memory. If you have good muscle memory, then the rest of it is second nature to you, you know? So once you start getting comfortable doing this, then you can start, you know, shooting as you flick. And even there, I see some under flicks for me, some over flicks. You really want to practice flicking accurately, even if it's really slowly, and then that will set you up to use that muscle memory and to be able to flick faster. And then what you can do to test this is do this firing mode. You can start on easy, you know, and if you find easy is too easy, you know, because there's a lot of time for, oh my god, there's a lot of time for you to flick over to a target. So this is a good way to get into your flicking. And then as you do, medium obviously gets faster, and then hard is the fastest. And that's a good way to build your flicks, to make sure that they're accurate and fast, because it's all well and good having accurate flicks. You also need to have fast flicks so that you can flick in time with your counter strafing, essentially. Because if you're counter strafing and then you have to flick slowly, that makes you a very easy target to shoot by the defenders. Whereas if you're counter strafing and you can flick, you know, sort of as you're moving, like this, then it gives you the best chance to kill the defender or whoever you're trying to shoot at before they can kill you. It's all about being like one fluid movement, you know? You just want to be fluid as you're going, because then that just, it speeds up the whole process. It's like slow is smooth, and I think it's slow is smooth and smooth is fast, or something like that. Which it makes sense, you know, once you get your counter strafing down and your flicking down, then once you're comfortable doing those, your speed will pick up, and then you'll be able to do them anytime, kind of wherever you are. And if, like in my last video where I talked about crosshair placement, if you have good crosshair placement and you're counter strafing well and your flicks are good, then you're really giving yourself not a lot of work to do. You know, you're making it easy for yourself, because your crosshair should be close to their head, so you only have to do a small flick. And if you're counter strafing properly, your flicks will be accurate, your shots will be accurate, so you're giving yourself a really high chance of succeeding. So then the next thing you want to focus is your spray. And spraying is not so important. It's still important. You want to have a good spray. There's bursting and there's spraying, and bursting is more important in this game than spraying. So if you're shooting your Vandal, you'll see it goes up and then to the left. And once you get to this point where it goes left and right, that's random. So we don't, you know, it's harder to control that even at the highest level because of the randomness. So what you want to focus on is your first 6 or 7 bullets, because they don't have any random horizontal recoil. You want to just shoot the first 7 bullets, right? And you see they climb vertically. And then to counter this, to shoot accurately, you want to pull down. And you see they're much closer together. They're closer to where my crosshair initially was, which is at head height. So if you're able to spray well, then you'll be able to get more headshots just on the basis of, if your first shot misses, you can give yourself that margin by spraying, by bursting on the head. The same goes for the Phantom. You know, if you're shooting that, you'll see it goes up and to the left, similar recoil, but again, this horizontal recoil after the first 6 or 7 shots is random. So you really want to focus on having a good burst, you know, good 7 shots or so. And that's vital, because if you're not hitting your first 7-ish shots, you're probably going to die in whatever gunfight you're fighting in at the time. Because if you're not hitting those shots fast, then the enemy is going to hit them faster, and then they'll kill you instead of you getting them. So then the last thing, which in my opinion is kind of the least important part, but it's still important, obviously all of these are important, is tracking. And now tracking is sort of more, this is where your slower sensitivity will come in handy, whereas if you have a too high sensitivity, tracking will become very difficult. But if you have a slower sensitivity, it'll be easier. With that being said, you don't want it too slow because then it'll get difficult again. So this is where your sweet spot kind of shows itself. So you can see these drones move side to side, right? And to practice your tracking, you really just want to follow them. And if you find your crosshairs moving too far forward, that's a sign that your sensitivity is a bit too high. And then likewise, if it's moving a bit behind it, so obviously they're not moving, there we go. If it's moving a bit behind it like this, that's a sign that your sensitivity is too slow. So that's basically all you want to do to practice your tracking. You just want to follow these dudes and then sort of adjust your sensitivity accordingly for them. But at the same time, you can also practice your tracking just by, you know, focusing on a head of a bot or something and running around. And this works, but the thing is, it can be, some sensitivities make it easier to track at close range, whereas some of them make it easier to track at long, medium ranges. I think it's slow sensitivities are easier to track at long range, whereas a high sensitivity makes it easier to track at close range, because a slower sensitivity, naturally, it takes more movement, more hand movement for you to track at a closer range, because the degree is just much bigger for the smaller distance you travel. So those are the basics. You want to practice your counter strafing properly. You want to practice your flicking, just flicking from head to head. You want to practice your bursts more than your sprays, because your sprays will be used significantly less of the time than bursts. And then your tracking, you want to practice as well. And you only need to give them like 10 minutes each. If you do 10 minutes of counter strafing and then 10 minutes of bursting or flicking or tracking, if you do 10 minutes of them every day, you'll see significant improvement pretty quickly, I'd reckon. Because it's once you start breaking them down and isolating them and focusing on them, then they add together, you know, they end up working together. If you know that you have good counter strafing, and you don't have, if it's second nature to you to counter strafe, then that facilitates all the rest of your aiming. And then that becomes dependent on how good your other aspects of aiming are. So once you get your counter strafing down, you can give that less time, because that's something that you'll just be using anyway, so that'll stay in practice. Whereas the rest of them, you can give them more time, because that's when they get more important. And just one sort of training activity you can do is, if you shoot 2 shots on a wall, doesn't matter where, doesn't have to be in the practice range, it can be anywhere. If you shoot 2 shots and you just sort of counter strafe your way around them and you're just shooting at them, you can see there that had slightly higher error because I mistimed my counter strafe. So you can focus on just shooting the one dot on the wall, or you can focus on both of them, and this sort of works your flicking. Right, and you just counter strafe between them and flick onto each one. And then also what you can do is, you know, practice your bursts. Counter strafe and burst on them. And you can see my right side accuracy is actually considerably better than my left side accuracy. And, you know, these are sort of things that you'll eventually just sort of you'll start noticing. But, you know, this is all practice to get you better so that you're good on both sides, I guess. So yeah, another way you can practice, just kind of practice anything, is by going into deathmatch. And you can even go into deathmatch and be like, okay, I'm only going to practice my flicking. So, you know, you just make sure to make it a point that you're flicking, so that you have solid flicking. Or you could practice your bursts. So you're like, okay, I want to practice my bursting. And you go into deathmatch and practice it. And then tracking is one that you can kind of practice nicely in deathmatch. I say nicely because if you're just practicing tracking, you don't necessarily have to kill the opponents. So if someone's not looking at you, you can just track them. You can just make sure you're tracking their head the entire time. And, you know, you don't have to worry about actually getting the kill. I think that's all that you need to know to get started in practicing each aspect of aiming and to improve your aim overall. If there's anything in specific you'd like me to do a video on, leave a comment and I'll be sure to check it out and make a video on it. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, favorite, subscribe, you know, click the bell, get notified, all that good stuff. And also follow me on Twitch. I'll link that in the description. And then if you have any questions and you want to ask me live, you can do so there. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.